start na tayo. Okay. Chito,
Okay.
nabuuin natin yung point mo.
So, Deng Xiaoping in 1992 decides to oppose the economic conservatives within the party. Those who backed him in cracking down on Tiananmen, the crackdown in Tiananmen Square. Why? Because he thought the Soviet Union collapsed. The Berlin Wall collapsed. The lesson he derived was not to go back to the Soviet model, but to go forward with economic reform, full blast, but no economic reform.
No political reform.
No political reform.
No political liberalization.
Only economic reform, stay with one-party rule, but then liberalize the economy. And that basically explains China's economic miracle, so-called, from a third world country to now the second biggest country.
Orion, any reaction? Hiro, Orion first?
How do we connect this to the EDSA uprising?
There is an analogy, actually. You could say that the students' uprising in Beijing, the demonstrations that were started by the students, and became actually like a citywide uprising of Beijing, and then became a national uprising in China. It happened in different cities around China. Was like our EDSA revolution, with one big exception. In the case of China, the government prevailed. They cracked down with tanks and military force. In the case of the Philippines, the people prevailed. The government, Marcos regime, they tried to employ, APCs and tanks, but the people resisted and the soldiers gave up. In China, the soldiers gave up in the first 2 weeks after the declaration of martial law. They came in, they were about to suppress, and then they saw the resistance of the students, of the workers, of the citizens. And they turned around, or they just stopped there. And there was this like people and army discussion.
Yeah.
And the slogan then was that the army is the people's army. We do not shoot on the people. So the decision to crack down was a dramatic decision taken by the Deng Xiaoping and the top leadership of the Communist Party under tremendous pressure. There was split. Zhao Ziyang did not want it. But the forces of the conservatives, Li Peng and Yang Shangkun, they wanted this. The standing committee was split. Deng Xiaoping had to break the tie.
Okay. Let me ask Hiro. Hiro, anything to add on this score?
What Chito mentioned, Deng's basically bold move into the southern provinces in 91-92. And this is where he supposedly declared. But he was talking about the whole country, China, that it would be glorious for the whole country to get wealthy. And that was a signal, basically, that the economic liberalization measures directed primarily to its own satellite city, Hong Kong. Because Deng knew that he needed desperately the help of the Hong Kong trading establishment to find a way basically to integrate backward into the southern eastern provinces.
Let me pause at this point now. What you're saying and what Chito was probably would have led to is the question of after Tiananmen, the state, the government survived, and you were saying there was a learning curve, and they applied that. They learned that you do not liberalize politically when you're in a crisis. They sustained the leadership.
What did Gorbachev have? Glasnost, political reform, and then Perestroika, economic reform. What Deng Xiaoping did was, to hell with Glasnost, just Perestroika, economic reform, and let's continue with Communist Party
because
rule.
Change has to be managed, right?
Well, that is the justification of Deng Xiaoping. There is the counter-argument, which is now a theoretical argument. If they had proceeded with Zhao Ziyang and Hu Yao Bang's approach, China would be a democratic society now. But in other words, it would have led to a welfare state. But that is now watered down the bridge. What we have now is China facing a new set of challenges because Deng's economic strategy worked for about 20 to 30 years.
Well, let me go to Orion. Orion, wouldn't you say that if Zhao Ziyang's option were to have triumphed at that time, could it have gone through the capitalist road and resulted in what the Philippines has seen? Oligarchs taking over, what Ukraine has seen, oligarchs taking over, what Russia had seen, oligarchs taking over, and the economic development plan shunned aside. Reactions.
I think that's a very,
Hiro.
very broad question
Yeah.
that you have to
Yeah.
take it apart. First and foremost, I think Deng and his advisors analyzed basically the political economy of China. Majority of the Chinese were still peasants in the countryside. You had that eastern seaboard urban areas, etc., etc. Okay? He realized basically they had to catch up with the West and with the ASEAN neighbors
But
as
the
far
point
as
is,
now. He realized
could
that
he have managed it if it was
No.
democratic already
No.
in the sense of electoral and
No.
so on? You're saying no.
No.
That's why the strong hand is necessary.
Well, let's not say strong. It was the guided hand, the very
Okay.
visible guided hand of central policy planning.
No reaction,
of the
Orion, Chito, to that.
You want to go ahead?
Orion, yeah, your reaction. You might defer to the age of the... so I'll give you the benefit of the...
Sa tingin ko, sir, most likely, sir, the oligarchs would have
Taken
taken
over.
over if it resulted in political change in the first part. Kasi, sir, given dun sa mga dun sa mga parang historical evidence ng mga nangyaring ganyan. For example, yun sa Russia. After nung fall nung USSR, ganoon yung may nangyari. Tapos dun sa after rin nung nabitak yung USSR, yung mga countries underneath it, yung mga sa Kazakhstan,
Eastern Europe,
sa Central Asia, sir.
Central Asia.
Doon parang doon nakita talaga na yung power napunta siya talaga doon sa mga oligarchs kumbaga.
Okay, Chito's reaction. Yeah.
Actually, this is the eternal debate. The path Deng Xiaoping took, he did not want to take Mao's utopian path. No? He thought that didn't accomplish anything. He did not want to go back to the Soviet central planning. So, but he did not want what Zhao Ziyang and the students were advocating, more democracy and overthrow the Communist Party, and yet continue on the road of economic socialism. So he chose the path of what he called the socialist market economy. You have a Communist Party, and then you liberalize the economy. You have a state sector, a private sector, and you have a cooperative, a rural sector. And we saw that he succeeded, at least
Beyond everyone's
during his
wildest dream.
lifetime. During his lifetime, he was able to achieve a level of prosperity for China. But the path not taken, or if you compare it to the path, then there's the other path of the Philippines. People power, but then economically it suffers. Okay, so in China, when I would talk to the Chinese intellectuals and they know I'm from the Philippines, they say, look what happened to the Philippines. You have democracy, but you don't have economic development. We have economic development, but we don't have what's your so-called democracy. So what do the people choose? What I'm saying is that, is there a way to bring, this is the philosophical issue here. Can you have a democratic form of socialism?
Well, to me, now everybody join in your reaction. But to me, if there is no economic democracy, there is no political democracy. Look at our elections. It is meaningless because people have to sell votes. Oligarchs buy votes. Democracy begins with economic democracy. If I cannot feed my family, I have no democracy. Orion, what's your reaction? Hiro, what's your reaction to
Let
Chito's
the
question?
young man go
Yeah,
first.
Orion.
Sa tingin ko, sir, it's right that parang pag hindi mo naman talaga kayang wala talaga yung parang hindi mo ma-bridge yung gap nung sa income, kumbaga doon sa pinakamahirap doon sa pinakamayaman. Mas mahirap talaga, sir, mag-function yung parang democracy talaga. Because kung sa democracy man yung election, parang ang mangyayari diyan is yung power is mapupunta talaga sa those who have the money and the means to control those who doesn't have enough money, parang ganun.
Okay, Hiro.
Well, this issue of whether democracy is necessary, let's make it clear. The experience of the Philippines,
Political democracy. You're referring to political
just
democracy.
political democracy,
Political democracy.
it's a farce. There is no broad-based, popular representative government. That is what democracy's process is
Yeah,
all
our
about.
Congress and senators
Again,
are multimillionaires.
Even when the American occupation started, they said you cannot impose a broad-based, popular representative government in a backward economy, which basically agrarian. The Americans knew that. He says you would concentrate power in a few. I mean, the whole history of the political economy of the United States, they started with only landlords and tradesmen given the right of suffrage and then worked their way through it. I mean, come on, there was no such thing as we the people in spite of their constitution.
We the landed people.
Exactly. I mean,
Landed elite.
you know, it was a struggle of African American. I mean, come on, let's face it. The democratic history of the United States is far from what they call the ideal. Even the Greeks themselves were debating what type of democracy. I mean, if you look at the Chinese Demsen model, okay, and what Deng did, again, he had the experience of hindsight looking at the wreckage of the command economy of the Soviet Union.
So that's the learning curve that you're saying.
And he knew that he looked at the Japanese, the South Koreans, and their drive to catch up with the West. South Korea to catch up with their former colonial masters, the Japanese. And then he understood, and they began to understand the workings of world trade. They only joined WTO in 2001.
Yeah. Well, let me fast forward. And again, I posit a point, and you react. I think what I'm saying, what Hiro is saying, what the others may give your thoughts on, you need a dictatorship of an economic development program. And that is what Deng focused on. And that has to be a dictatorship because you do not achieve anything on the economic front. If it changes, the program changes every 3, 4, or 6 years, depending on the term of the elected officials' reactions.
A dictatorship is fine as long as you're not the one being dictated on.
And the dictatorship is even better if I'm the dictator.
So the point is, though the students certainly will not agree with you, especially those who were in Tiananmen Square. But the point I'm making is this. You see, what led to the crackdown in Tiananmen Square was the feeling, rightly or wrongly, of Deng Xiaoping and the other party leaders, that they were on the verge of collapse, that they were going to lose power, and that they needed regime. It's the instinct for regime survival. They needed to crush
Opposition.
the students or the demonstrations, retake the symbol of political power, Tiananmen Square, and then impose order.
Yeah.
And in the case of Deng Xiaoping, then he realized there's not going to be an election. He was very unpopular. After the crackdown, the Communist Party had a big problem. What would be the source of legitimacy? It cannot be military alone.
30 seconds.
It had to be economic development.
30 seconds before the break.
Additional question, parang nag-translate ba yung movement nung sa Tiananmen Square sa countryside, which is 'di ba nandoon yung parang pinakamalaking population of China.
Okay.
Did it translated or pag nag-translate siya doon would have yung result ba?
Chito will answer that after this break.